I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
We are Candor Talk Live, the new progressive raw talk show discussing current hot political and social topics. The host is Dicey. www.candortalk.com.
All right, good evening, everybody. This is Dicey. This is Candor Talk Live. And yes, I keep saying I'm going to be here every Saturday, and I'm not. And it's just not a good thing. So, sorry about that. If you are somebody who listens to the show, we do apologize. We're going to do our best to be here every Saturday, but it's not always easy. You know, this is a free show, so, you got to work. And not that I necessarily work all the time on Saturdays, but you got to catch up on things in life. Anyway, so a whole lot has been going on in the United States of America ever since we elected this man, Donald Trump, to be the president of the United States. And to this past week, I think was very monumental and very instrumental. I think it's going to be a very historical moment. And so today's show is GOP must impeach Trump. If you heard at the very beginning of the show, you heard Richard Nixon basically saying, I'm not a crook and I welcome these investigations and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The truth was that Richard Nixon actually was a crook. Richard Nixon was a liar, and he was a very good liar, and he was a persuasive liar. We have a man in the White House who is not a good liar, who is not a persuasive liar, but he's a crook. He's dishonest, and he's a pathological liar. And so we have now reached a level in this country where it's not just about the fact that this guy is not competent to run the White House, which we have seen by so many things that have transpired, from the travel ban. He didn't even literally vet that travel ban with lawyers, and other people could tell him about the legality of this. He didn't even really think it all the way through. We've seen how that just collapsed, and all the other things. The healthcare bill collapsed, and even if you can talk about how the GOP House passed this random bill, AHCA, the truth is that bill they knew was never going to pass the Senate, which means it's never going to become law, and Obamacare is still the law of the land. It has not been repealed. So even if you have all these alleged, healthcare institutions getting out of the exchange, Obamacare is still the law of the land, period. So there's been so many things that have shown that, and not to mention that he golfs all the time. He's going and having these meetings at Mar-a-Lago and raise the price of Mar-a-Lago so that he could, get more memberships. And so it went from like $100,000 membership to $200,000 membership when he became president. This guy is like constantly there's nothing that's actually getting done. His first 100 days, there was no legislative accomplishment. This guy is not equipped to be at the helm of the United States of America. But it's not even about the competency why today we are talking about Donald Trump being impeached. And we'll get into why we think Donald Trump needs to be impeached and the things that have transpired that have made it very clear that impeachment is warranted at this time. But before we get into that, I think it's important that we talk about what is impeachment. So I'm going to play a video right now. It's a 4-minute video. And it's called Politically... I think they're called Politically Inclined. This is a YouTube video. I use a lot of YouTube videos to play on this show so you can get context and get background information so you can understand why we're saying the things that we're saying and where we're getting the things that we're saying from. So here, I'm going to play this video real quickly, explain to you how the impeachment process works. Obviously, you're not going to be able to see the video because this is audio, but it's important for you to understand impeachment and the impeachment process. Here it goes.
is you. You're a politician who's worked hard your entire life to honorably represent your fellow citizens. But you're not perfect, and now you're being impeached. But what is impeachment? To start, impeachment is a power that is given entirely to Congress. For those unaware, this is the Capitol building where Congress gathers. These are the two houses of Congress. This one is the House of Representatives, often referred to as just the House, and this one is the Senate. The House is comprised of 435 representatives, that number being determined by the population of each state, and the Senate is comprised of 100 senators, 2 senators per state. In order to be impeached, 3 steps must be fulfilled. Step 1, present criminal charges. If anyone believes you committed a crime while in office, all they need to do is present a list of those crimes to the House. Whether or not these crimes actually occurred is irrelevant and will be decided later on. Now on to Step 2, determining an impeachable offense. Upon hearing the criminal charges, the House then decides if a vote should be held to impeach you based on the charges presented. All 435 members are not going to review the charges because, frankly, they're just too busy for that. So this task will be assigned to a committee like everything else. In this case, the Judiciary Committee is responsible for determining this. But if you ever read the Constitution, you'll notice that it's incredibly vague on, well, just about everything. This includes what is considered an impeachable offense. All that's written is treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Treason and bribery are clearly stated, but other high crimes and misdemeanors could mean anything, nothing at all, or somewhere in the middle. So the Judiciary Committee is given absolute discretion in this decision. Even the Supreme Court can't interfere. If the committee decides the charges are an impeachable offense, then we move on to Step 3, vote for impeachment. It's at this time that the committee notifies all 435 members of the House that the charges are an impeachable offense. Now the entire House of Representatives will gather and vote on your impeachment. Just a simple majority vote is needed to impeach you. Now that all 3 of these steps have been fulfilled, you've been impeached. Now is probably a good time to tell you that impeachment doesn't necessarily mean you're being removed from office, and certainly isn't the end of your political career. To be impeached is only part 1 of the removal from office process, and just means that the House has decided to put you on trial for the charges presented. Congress can now move on to part 2, conviction. Like impeachment, 3 steps need to be fulfilled in order to convict you. Step 1, notify the Senate. The House has done its job in attempting to remove you from office and will now notify the Senate that you've been impeached. Once the Senate has been notified, Step 2, trial by the Senate. This is where the Senate takes over and puts you on trial. You're the defendant, the United States is the prosecutor, and all 100 members of the Senate are the jury. If you're the president, then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the presiding judge. If you're not the president, then the vice president will be the presiding judge. The trial will occur no differently than a standard court case. When the trial is completed, Congress moves on to Step 3, vote for conviction. All 100 members of the Senate will now vote on your conviction. Unlike a standard court case where the jury must vote unanimously, only a 2/3 majority vote is needed to convict you. Now that these 3 steps have been fulfilled, you've been convicted and removed from office. If I'm convicted by the Senate, does that mean I'm going to jail too, you ask? No. Being convicted by the Senate will only remove you from political office. It's up to a standard court of law to put you on trial for your crimes and determine what your legal punishment will be. If any of these steps are not fulfilled, then the entire removal from office process is stopped. For example, President Andrew Johnson, President Bill Clinton, and President Richard Nixon were the only 3 presidents to face removal from office. Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were both impeached, but the Senate was unable to achieve a 2/3 vote to convict them. So they both went back to the White House to continue to serve the remainder of their term as president. Congress was in the process of impeaching Richard Nixon, but Nixon resigned the presidency before the House could vote. To recap, in order to be removed from political office, the 2 parts of the removal from office process must be completed. Part 1, impeachment, and Part 2, conviction. To be impeached, the criminal charges will be presented to the House of Representatives, a committee will determine the charges to be an impeachable offense, and the House as a whole will vote to impeach you with a simple majority. Once impeached, Congress moves to conviction. To be convicted, the House will notify the Senate, and the Senate will put you on trial. After the trial, the Senate will vote to convict you with a 2/3 majority. Once convicted, you're removed from political office.
Okay, so basically you heard how the process actually works in order to impeach someone. Okay, it's not just necessarily only impeaching the president, but it's also about impeachment in general. So, excuse me, I have a cold, which I seem to be having a lot lately. So anyway, after hearing that, you basically heard the steps that need to go forward in order to impeach him. I'm not even saying that we've gotten to the stage in which, you know, the House is going to move past it and all that stuff. We haven't even gotten there yet. What I'm saying, though, is that Trump does need to be impeached. And impeachment is removing somebody from office. Trump is not equipped to run the presidency of the United States, and his lawlessness is what should lead him to impeachment. Now, you've heard people talk before about the emolument clause, and his foreign ties and foreign relationships. Well, we're never going to really be able to know as much as we really need to know if we don't have the GOP who has the backbone to subpoena his tax records, which would tell us about his business relationships in Russia and other places, and if he's compromised in any way. The problem is, he's not legally required to submit his tax return, so the GOP has now got into, look, he's submitted some financial information, his financial statement, and Trump will keep telling you, I submitted my financial statement. It's my financial statement, and that statement, I had all these documents. Like, we're supposed to believe that Donald Trump is actually an honest person, and that Donald Trump would be forthcoming in his financial statement. And if your financial statement is a great summation of everything that's going on in your financial life, then why not just release your tax returns to confirm that? But he doesn't want to do that. So we clearly aren't able to necessarily know whether or not there'll be grounds to bring forth the emolument clause violation. And if I'm correct, I don't think that anyone has ever been actually charged under it. So this would actually be a first impression, basically. So this would be like a case of first impression. Essentially. So we're not really sure about that. But this is the thing. After you hear that, you realize that it might be a good time for the GOP to gain some backbone, considering they run all houses of government. It might be a good idea for them now, considering what has transpired. It might be a good idea. You can hear people honking outside. It might be a good idea to decide that it's time to impeach Donald Trump. And I'm going to play another clip. But I think it's an interesting clip. It's by Vox, in which it talks about a little bit about what happened with Bill Clinton, Nixon, etc. And then we'll get into why I think Donald Trump should be impeached and why I think now there actually are grounds. Before it was just, I think, a little bit of hysteria, and it just wasn't legally grounded before. But now I think that he has put himself in a position where a very untenable situation now, because he has done things now that I think require anybody who is in government, in the federal government, in the House and in the Senate, to start really considering whether or not they want to be part of the history in which they protected a man who has blatantly committed a crime, or do they want to be, the individuals who will show some kind of backbone. But anyway, let me play this clip, and after this clip, we will get back and I will tell you why he's got to be impeached. Here it is.
How to set up a brand new government, they ran into a problem. What should happen if a president, in Benjamin Franklin's words, has rendered himself obnoxious? Most countries didn't have elected leaders or ways to get rid of them, so Franklin and the framers turned to a provision of British common law known as impeachment. Trial, conviction, punishment.
In Great Britain, impeachment could be brought against anybody, any citizen. And it also could result in any punishment, including death.
Michael Gerhardt is a constitutional law professor who literally wrote the book on impeachment.
And so they put impeachment into the Constitution and then set up a whole series of unique American features in it.
The Constitution lays out 3 offenses for which any federal official, including the president, can be impeached. The first 2, treason and bribery, are pretty straightforward. Treason means helping enemies of the United States, and bribery is taking money or gifts in exchange for a political favor.
And the last phrase, high crimes and misdemeanors, is hard to define. Obviously, it's not defined in the Constitution, but these were thought to be serious offenses against the Republic and serious breaches of trust.
For 3 U.S. presidents, Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton, the question of whether to impeach and remove them from office centered around whether their behavior fit into this third category of high crimes and misdemeanors. The impeachment process has to start in the House of Representatives. Any member can introduce an impeachment resolution.
A resolution, articles of impeachment of George Bush, President of the United States. Resolved that President George W. Bush be impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors.
But plenty, like this one, go nowhere. That's because impeachment charges have to be approved by a majority of the House Judiciary Committee. Next, the full House of Representatives votes on whether to impeach. If a simple majority votes yes, the president is officially impeached. But that doesn't necessarily mean they lose the presidency. That decision happens in a Senate trial. The senators are basically the jury. They hear evidence from both sides, and if 67 of those senators vote to convict, the president is removed from office. This has never actually happened. A House majority voted to impeach Andrew Johnson for firing his Secretary of War. This was after months of conflict after Reconstruction following the Civil War. The only other president impeached by the House was Bill Clinton in 1998. But in both of those cases, not enough senators voted to actually remove the president from office. Johnson was only one vote short, but in Clinton's case, it wasn't even close.
The respondent, William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, is not guilty as charged in the second article of impeachment.
That's because votes in Clinton's impeachment in the House and trial in the Senate were split almost completely by party.
And part of the disagreement within the Senate had to do with the context in which Clinton's actions had taken place.
The whole thing started when Clinton was sued for sexual harassment by a woman named Paula Jones, who had worked for him when he was governor of Arkansas. In a deposition for that case, Jones's lawyers asked Clinton if he'd had a sexual relationship with a different woman, a White House intern named Monica Lewinsky. Clinton said he hadn't.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
But that wasn't true.
I had intimate contact with her that was inappropriate.
House will be in order.
Republicans in the House argued that Clinton should be impeached for lying under oath.
This is a public act, not a private act. What the defenders want to do is lower the standards by which we hold this president.
You, sir, may resign your post.
Democrats disagreed that the offense was serious enough to be called a high crime. At one point, they walked out of the House chamber in protest.
There is one small segment on the far right who have lost all objectivity and are determined to impeach the president at all costs.
House Resolution 611 resolved that William Jefferson Clinton, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors.
But throughout this process, Clinton's popularity never really suffered.
In a sense, the American people are demanding that he be tossed out of office.
Not a single Democratic senator voted to remove Clinton from office.
Typically, you need to have members of more than one party.
That's one of the major differences between Clinton's case and President Richard Nixon's. Over the course of several months in 1973, members of Congress and the American people learned about Nixon's possible involvement in a break-in at the offices of the Democratic National Committee.
The Democratic National Committee is located in the Watergate office building.
The 5 men carried cameras and apparently had planted electronic bugs.
The espionage operation on the president's behalf was called the Offensive Security Program. The charge that the president knowingly participated in the Watergate cover-up.
That evidence only came out because Republicans, members of Nixon's own party, called for investigations into the president's behavior.
I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
What did the president know? And when did he know it?
In the House Judiciary Committee, Republicans joined with Democrats to approve articles of impeachment against Nixon.
The public began to kind of render a judgment against Nixon, which was his popularity plummeted.
But Nixon resigned before the full House could vote on impeachment.
I must put the interests of America first. I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Republican leaders had told him there's no way he'd survive the vote, which helps explain why no president has ever been removed from office by impeachment. For that to happen, the president doesn't just have to commit some high crime or misdemeanor. He has to lose the support of his own party, in which case, history suggests he'll see himself out.
Okay, so you heard that. That was actually from Vox. It's a great clip. It actually gives you a great summation of the impeachment process, which is kind of redundant because I played the other clip before, but I think it was good to hear that entire clip, also because it tells you about what happened in the history of this country in terms of the impeachment process. And so, as you hear with Andrew Johnson, he actually went through the entire impeachment process, just like Bill Clinton did, and both of them were not convicted in the Senate. Andrew Johnson, though, he was impeached because, Andrew Johnson was impeached because he also fired his Army Secretary of Army, which is very, very interesting when we segue into that. And then Bill Clinton was impeached because he lied about a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky, which is obviously lying under oath, which is essentially perjury. But it was about a sexual, insignificant situation. I mean, insignificant in terms of his mind. Obviously, it's very significant in terms of history books. But that's what Bill Clinton was impeached for. Nixon was they were in the process of impeaching Nixon when he resigned, obviously, as you heard from the tape. But Nixon, if you look at what Nixon did, Nixon actually did commit crimes, right? Nixon did violate the law. So did Donald Trump. And I think there are so many parallels between what happened during the Nixon era and what's happening now in the United States of America. In terms of the behavior of Nixon and the behavior of Donald Trump. Nixon, like I said before, was a sophisticated crook. He was intellectually sound. He was presentable. He at least could garner support because there were some commonalities between him and his GOP base, and his GOP Congress. But the problem is that Donald Trump doesn't have that. But there are so many similarities. For example, Nixon also used to try to go after his political opponents, really go after them, and go after people who he thought were leaking. There was a lot of leaking going on during the Nixon presidency, and Nixon would go after people who he thought, like even celebrities, outside individuals, going after them with tax audits and things like that to curtail them from trying to oppose Nixon. Donald Trump has also gone after his political opponents and tried to ruin them, their lives, their careers, everything. Look what he did to Hillary Clinton. Regardless, he had a friendship with her before that happened. He tried to ruin Hillary. He tried to ruin Ted Cruz and Ted Cruz's father, and by spreading misinformation about that. He tried to ruin Marco Rubio. He definitely ruined Jeb Bush. I mean, there's just definitely a lot of similarities. Then not to mention, recently, just now after firing James Comey, Trump tweets out that James Comey better be hopeful that there aren't any tapes that discuss their situation. Discuss whether or not James Comey had told Donald Trump that he was not under investigation in the Trump-Russia investigation. So anyway, when you look at Nixon and some of the behavior, Nixon also, they had what was called the Saturday Night Massacre, where he fired his attorney general, the deputy, and the special prosecutor. The special prosecutor who was investigating him on Watergate. So what happens with Donald Trump? Donald Trump is being investigated for Trump-Russia. He fires another person who's investigating, Preet Bharara, which was one of the U.S. attorneys. He fires also Sally Yates, who refuses to go along with what she believes is a violation of the Constitution. He fires James Comey, who is the director of the FBI, who is investigating him for Russia, who had just recently testified about the Trump-Russia investigation and about, a host of things as well. And then also a day or so after, I think, Sally Yates testified. I think it was the very next day, which I'm pretty certain it was, because Donald Trump always does something erratic after there's something damaging, and Sally Yates was damaging testimony. So anyway, the reason why I think that Donald Trump should be fired is based on this language right here that I'm about to play in this particular clip. And once I play it, I think you'll understand exactly why I think he should be impeached. Here's the tape. Here's the clip, actually. And this is from NBC News. I'm not going to play the whole clip. It's his interview with, what's his name? Lester Holt. Listen to what he says here in this particular interview about why he fired the FBI director, James Comey. Listen.
Made a recommendation, but regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire Comey, knowing there was no good time to do it. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election. that they should have won. And the reason they should have won it is the Electoral College is almost impossible for a Republican to win. Very hard, because you start off at such a disadvantage. So everybody was thinking they should have won the election. This was an excuse for having lost an election.
Are you angry with Mr. Comey because of his Russia investigation?
I just want somebody that's competent.
Okay. I'm just going to play, like I said, I wasn't going to play the whole thing because I only have less than 20 minutes left. So let me just go through this real quickly. So anyway, if you heard him in that particular exchange between him and Lester Holt, he said before he decided to fire James Comey, he thought to himself, this Trump Russia, third person psycho Trump, this Trump Russia investigation is only because the Democrats are upset that they lost the election. Okay. So what he's basically saying is I fired James Comey because he would not make the Trump Russia investigation go away. And you know what that's called in the eyes of the law? Obstruction of justice. That's what happened here. That's a crime that is against the law to obstruct justice. If you recall, when I went through the impeachment process, those videos, it tells you that it's a high crime or misdemeanor. It's also treason or bribery. He committed a crime when he fired James Comey because he states that he fired James Comey because before he thought about it, he said, you know what, this Trump Russia thing's got to go away. And, this is ridiculous, basically. That's what he's saying. That is clearly a violation of the law. He's tried to stop a pending investigation against himself, and the GOP is saying, oh, it's really a good idea that he fired Comey. Not to mention that this is about the 15th different statement that they've made about why they fired James Comey. But finally, eventually, Trump, being so flippant and cannot control himself and doesn't think before he speaks, he literally gave away the exact reason why he fired James Comey. And the exact reason why he fired James Comey was a violation of the law. So, in addition to that, in that particular interview also, he said that before he decided to keep James Comey, this is what he said. He basically said that, and obviously this isn't verbatim, but you can go back and watch the interview between him and Lester Holt, that him and Comey had a dinner together, right? They had dinner together, and before that, Trump wasn't really, didn't know whether or not he was really going to keep him on as FBI director. He wasn't sure, he wasn't certain. And when he had dinner with James Comey, one of the questions he asked him is, am I under investigation? And he said that James Comey told him he wasn't under investigation. Conveniently, after that interview, at that dinner, James Comey was still the FBI director. Oh, that's pretty convenient, right? Isn't that beautiful? Am I under investigation? No, okay, you can be the FBI director. To me, that seems like a very quid pro quo. A very disingenuous, very dishonest exchange between two people. And I don't know whether that's actually even true because I'm having a difficult time believing that James Comey is that incompetent, that he would make that kind of mistake, basically offering to not investigate Trump, essentially, for the purposes of maintaining his job. That is, literally, that would be a bombshell. So, after that, though, however, Donald Trump, after committing obstruction of justice, fired James Comey. Stories start coming out saying James Comey didn't actually tell Donald Trump he wasn't under investigation. Because part of what Donald Trump was saying is that on 3 separate occasions in that interview that he has with Lester Holt, that on 3 separate occasions, and he also said in his letter to Comey, firing Comey, that Comey had told him that he wasn't under investigation. Which is interesting because Comey comes before the Senate, and the Senate in the Senate hearing, basically under oath, not basically, is under oath, and says that the Trump campaign is part of the investigation. Trump is part of the Trump campaign, which naturally means he personally would also be investigated. So, what we're basically seeing right now is a contradiction from basically what Comey would have said under oath, which would have been perjury if he was lying, and basically made it seem like, there was an investigation against Trump campaign, but there wasn't. Because that's essentially what you're saying. I mean, Trump campaign is Trump is the guy. So that's something that we're going to have to figure out later on, and hopefully James Comey is going to testify in the public hearing. Hopefully they let him. They tried to call him in for a private, secure, obviously, meeting, and James Comey said, no, I'm not going to do it. James Comey allegedly wants to be able to testify in public. But nevertheless, what Donald Trump did in this particular situation, so many things surrounding this James Comey firing, is considered obstruction of justice. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to play a clip right now, a really short clip. That'll tell you what obstruction of justice is. So you can understand why we're basically saying that it is time for somebody to have the requisite backbone to do something about this. When a president is committing crimes, when the president is doing things that are illegal, not to mention all the host of pathological things he's done since he's been president. But when a president is blatantly caught in committing crime and essentially admits it, and they don't do anything, there are going to be problems. But anyway, let me play this clip. This is what obstruction of justice is.
So what is obstruction of justice? Well, we see this oftentimes in movies, etc., when investigators are stating to a witness who won't appropriately give information about a potential crime, etc., that they might charge them with obstruction of justice. Well, it's generally any attempt by an individual to obstruct or thwart a legislative or judicial process. Now, investigation or acting out pursuant to a search warrant or an arrest warrant or anything of that nature could be part of the judicial process. And when an individual refuses to cooperate or knowingly conceals information or hides information to thwart that investigation or that furtherance of the judicial process, then they could be charged with obstruction of justice. But generally, it requires some intentional or knowing act that in some way obstructs the progress of a judicial process, such as the investigation or execution of some court order, such as arrest or a warrant of.
Okay, so you heard that, right? That's what obstruction of justice is. That is exactly what Donald Trump did. Now, obviously, one of the main questions is going to be, is that did it actually obstruct the investigation, right? That's going to be the major thing is, did Donald Trump firing James Comey actually obstruct the investigation? Now, you have certain people testifying it won't affect the investigation. The acting, FBI director now said they're going to keep moving forward with the investigation. It's not going to affect the investigation. There's still the Senate investigation. There's still the House investigation. So they're going to pretend like it didn't obstruct the investigation. And it has to be the intent of it, right? What was his intent? Well, his particular intent was to conceal or thwart the investigation, as you heard laid out as some of the elements for establishing obstruction of justice. So part of what he did was attempt to stop the investigation, or at least curtail the investigation against him. Because what they're saying is that James Comey, the investigation was heating up and it was picking up speed. And there might have been evidence at that point that James Comey might have just had his hands on, basically, that could have said that there was collusion between Trump and the actual Russians in terms of our election. But this isn't even about Trump's collusion with Russians. I'm not even remotely talking about that right now. That is not why I say he should be impeached. Although, if it's found out, he clearly is going to be impeached. He's going to be in jail as well. But what my point is, and I'm taking Trump-Russia out of this. Trump-Russia isn't even the main story. The main story right now is the fact that he obstructed justice in the middle of an investigation. He fires a lead investigator. That is Nixonian. Nixon fired the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox. He fires a special prosecutor that's investigating him under Watergate in the Saturday Night Massacre. That's very similar to what Donald Trump did. He didn't have to fire his attorney general and everything else. He's not going to fire Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is basically a puppet for a water carrier for Donald Trump. He's not going to fire him, but he did fire a host of people. Now, it might have not all happened on a Saturday, or none of it happened on a Saturday, but what did happen is that he continues to fire people who are realizing that he's violating the law. Sally Yates felt he was violating the law. Preet Bharara was investigating for violating the law. James Comey was investigating for violating the law, for breaking the law. These are all people who were investigating this, or either investigating him or believed that he had violated the law. Not to mention, Sally Yates had also told him that Flynn was compromised, and they didn't listen, and kept him on even 18 days, I believe, after they were already told. So there's so much incompetency in the Trump presidency. There's so much of that, and there's definitely a lot of smoke when it comes to the Trump-Russia investigation. But put that aside, whether he did Russia or not, it doesn't matter anymore, because this in and of itself is enough to get yourself impeached. There's no grounds to not impeach Trump now. When you go and fire the the primary number one investigator of you, then clearly you are trying to do something to stop that investigation. And it's very obvious. There's no way there's going to be a smooth transition from, James Comey to the new director. Trump fired him so abruptly and so cowardly, but not even telling him, didn't even give him the respect that he deserved. Then went out afterwards and started calling him a showboat and everything else. I'm actually going to play this clip where Trump is actually calling Comey basically a showboat and a grandstander. Let me play this clip real quick. Oh, sorry. Let me see. Do I have that clip? Oh, we're going to play it real quick because I'm almost out of time. Here we go. And I might get some kind of random commercial right now.
Look, he's a showboat. He's a grandstander. The FBI has been in turmoil. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that. You take a look at the FBI a year ago. It was in virtual turmoil less than a year ago. It hasn't recovered from that.
Monday you met with the...
Okay. I don't need to play the whole thing, but as you can see here, Trump is basically trying to now attack the person who's investigating him. He also sends out a tweet saying, look, if you fuck around Comey, I might have tapes, so you better be careful. Which was, again, just a classic example of ineptness. This is ineptitude, obtuseness at its finest. Everybody knows that part of what buried Nixon were the tapes. You now are alleging that there might be tapes that you might have wiretapped basically the White House and taped everybody who's on the conversations. Something you did not want President. Okay, wow, the hypocrisy is astounding. But anyway, nevertheless, why would you even say that? Because now they can subpoena those tapes. Not that the GOP will have any backbone to do that, but they could. And you've put yourself in a position now where at some point, when the Democrats take back over the House, which I think they're going to, and I think they're going to take it back in a big way. Because I think people realize that there is a huge difference between Democrats and Republicans in terms of, they're both the same in terms of being full of shit. But in terms of how the perception is of society, of the United States, is different when it's Democrats as opposed to Republicans. Now, mind you, I want to say one other thing about, impeachment, too. And some similarities between Trump and Nixon. Nixon was a Republican. Now, Nixon obviously wasn't impeached. He had to resign, and he got pardoned by Ford. But that did not negate the fact that Nixon was essentially a crooked president, and he happened to be Republican. Bill Clinton was not at all convicted. And he went on to serve both of his terms. So, what we're looking at right now is the Republican Party having a foundational, fundamental problem with corruption at the highest level. At the highest level, and they do nothing about it. It must be noted, too, that even during the Nixon years, even during Nixon, there were GOP with all that evidence that still did not want to impeach Nixon. Literally did not want to impeach him. The fact that they couldn't even get everybody basically to want to impeach him to tell you how bad things are. And that's part of the problem we're having right now with Donald Trump. Secretly, the GOP is probably sitting there saying to themselves, we got to get rid of this guy. But publicly, they can't say it because they're so scared of their particular base. They think they're going to get voted out of office because of their base. They realize, and they say, Democrats are never going to vote for Republicans, so we have no reason to really support anybody unless they're supporting Trump. Not realizing that a lot of the people who are opposing Trump are their own base. The people that help put money into their campaigns, the people who vote for them consistently, they're not realizing they're pissing off their own particular base in the process. Because they think this is just Democrat hysteria, and because we've been saying impeach him for a long time. I'm not a Democrat anymore, but I'm a liberal, but still, it doesn't matter. Because everybody's been saying impeach him, impeach him, impeach him. Those on the left, I'm a left. They started to say it's just a left-wing conspiracy, so let's just ignore it. But there's certain things that he's done, and now especially admitting that publicly, what he's done is now made it so difficult for any GOP person to probably get reelected if they don't do something about Trump. Because this base that are protecting him right now are not going to be able to sustain him. He's at a 36% approval rating. You've got majority of the country thought that him firing Comey was improper. You even have a double digits Republicans who thought that firing Comey was irresponsible. I mean, it was like 13%, but that's double digits. When are you going to get double digits against Donald Trump with the way these polls have looked for a long time? Majority of Americans, at least according to the polls, and you can't always believe every single thing you hear in a poll, but majority of the Americans wanted to see, did not like the way that Donald Trump had fired James Comey. So when you're sitting here looking at those numbers and you're a GOP person, you have to be asking yourself, how do we maneuver this? The first thing is this. If you let Trump continue to do the things he's doing, he's going to get worse. It's going to get worse and worse and worse, and people are going to become more and more tolerant of this stuff, that we become desensitized to the fact that this guy is a crook. This is a scam. What he's doing right now is a hustle. This is not legitimate, and his followers and supporters are getting hustled. And eventually, slowly but surely, a lot of them are starting to realize we got played. So, but the reality is that it doesn't matter whether or not these guys are going to win re-election. They take an oath promising to protect the country with the Constitution, basically, and protect us from enemies, foreign, domestic, any threat to the Constitution. And Donald Trump is a threat to the Constitution. He is a constitutional crisis. He is a Nixon, but worse. Nixon was at least smart. We are in a situation in a time period in which this is not even the country we ever even knew. We don't know what's going on anymore. You don't trust anybody. You don't trust government. Everything, every institution is basically being destroyed, basically. The credibility of those institutions by countries like Russia, leaking all these things, WikiLeaks, all these places trying to just destroy democratic institutions. And we've got Donald Trump at the helm helping to destroy these institutions. He acts as though he wants the investigation to go forward, but the truth is he tried to stop it. And that activity, that action right there means he must be impeached. There's no more conversation anymore about, is this hysteria? Is this just the left-wing conspiracy? Is this Democrats salty that they lost the election? This has nothing to do with it. Yes, Democrats did not like James Comey. Some called for him to resign or be fired. I called for him to be resigned. I wanted him to resign or be fired. But the timing of this is improper. You cannot fire the guy who's investigating you. You just can't do it. No matter what we felt. And are we supposed to believe that the Republicans all of a sudden were doing this to appease the Democrats? We all know they weren't doing it to appease the Democrats or to make the Democrats happy. They were doing it because Donald Trump needed to protect his own ass. Yes, we were mad at Comey. Yes, a lot of us were, because we thought that what he did was improper with the whole reinvestigation of Hillary Clinton. And we thought that he's handled this whole thing incompetently. But that did not mean that we thought that he should be fired in the middle of an investigation against the President of the United States by the President of the United States. So that's our show today, ladies and gentlemen. I've got to go because my time is running out. But I thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll be back next Saturday. And I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot more going on this week, so there's probably going to be a lot more to talk about, and there's so much more I could have talked about right now, but I just don't have the time. So until next time, everybody, have a good Saturday. Good night.